If you're watching this channel, it's because you don't enjoy watching the world squander what Christendom built, but you want to do your part. And chances are you've heard me mention a great means by doing just that. Email made by and for Catholics. Check out fidei.email. That's FIDEI.email. Built for Catholic individuals, families, organizations, and groups. They're private, secure, and of course, they're Catholic. And they're offering 2 months off on your first year for an annual subscription if you enter the coupon code Return to Tradition without spaces. That's the name of this channel, without spaces, at checkout. Since 2020 and the events of that year, we've seen the steady decrease in mass attendance accelerate. There was a study done some time ago, I reported on it here, that stated that using cell phone tracking data, we've seen that regular attendance of the Mass in the United States dropped from about 20% of Catholics attending regularly, which was defined in that study as twice a month or more, to about 5 or 6% of Catholics on average attending Mass regularly. And we can hope and pray and work on our neighbors that as time goes on, that we can get those numbers back up to where they were before the events of 2022. And those numbers were abysmal, but they were a far cry better than where we are now. I'm sure some of you have seen in your parishes the emptying of the pews. This hasn't happened with traditional parishes. Everybody who goes to a traditional Mass will tell you that their parishes are fuller than ever before. But the typical diocesan parish, which comprises 99% of parishes or better, in the United States at least, they've seen a steady decline. But it's not only in America. We have an interesting story here out of Germany, where there has been a steady decline in the church tax. I'll describe what the church tax is here in a moment. But it's fueled by hundreds of thousands of people officially leaving the church in Germany. This is going to have a catastrophic effect on the church in Germany. Or it could be, from a very different perspective, what the church in Germany desperately needs. A sort of divine intervention, if you will. Because the church in Germany is firmly in the hands of synodal heretics. They are so far gone that they make what's going on in Rome with the Synod of Synodality look tame by comparison. And people are leaving the church because of it, in droves. Last year was something like 250,000 Catholics in Germany officially left the Catholic Church. I'll tell you what I mean also by officially here in a moment. Let's turn to the story, though. Headline from cath.net, which is sort of a more moderate life site news in Austria and Germany. From now on, revenues from church taxes will decrease. The legendary wealth of the church is now truly becoming a legend. The consequences will be drastic and felt above all at the grassroots level. So what's the church tax? If you're not familiar with this, in Germany, there are certain Christian religions are registered with the state as being essentially officially sanctioned. But instead of tithing every Saturday or every Sunday or whatever directly to the parish, you are registered with the government in that country as a member of that religion, whatever it is, Catholicism, Lutheranism, whatever it is. And then you pay your tithe to the government, and the government then gives the money directly to the churches. And that tithe is at 10%, by the way. If you want out of that tithe, you have to formally, in writing, announce to the government that you have left the church. And then the church, whatever religion you're a member of, will be informed, their leadership will be informed by the state that you have renounced the faith, that you've left the faith. I'm a little uncertain on what this means for the groups with quasi-canonical statuses, the uncertain canonical statuses, like the SSPX, for instance, who exist in canonical limbo. They're not in schism. Rome has said repeatedly they are not in schism. They have said that they just don't have a canonical status. They're in canonical limbo, basically, while their debate with the Vatican continues. I'm not sure how that works. If you are in Germany or are familiar with the church tax in Germany and the SSPX situation there, let me know in the comments. I'd love to know what the situation is there. But people, by the hundreds of thousands every year, are leaving the church in Germany. This is causing a reduction in the church tax, as well as some other factors. And the end result of this will be that the church in Germany, which is usually the first or considered the most rich or the second richest church in the world after the United States, will no longer be rich at all. What do you think the consequences of that will be for the universal church? The Vatican gets a large portion of its income from Germany. What do you think is going to happen? From the article, quote, "First of all, we should give the all clear. We don't have to hold any collections yet so that the bishops can get a new minicar for his visitation trips and replace his frayed robe with a new one. German bishops will probably be driven around the world in luxury cars by their drivers for a very long time to come. Nevertheless, the signals in the finance departments of the dioceses are pointing to a storm. Last year, the church tax revenue of the German dioceses was 330 million euros less than in the previous year. Adjusted for inflation, church tax revenue in 2023 will be around 7% lower than in 2000. After many years of fiscal self-deception with falling church membership numbers and sharply rising church tax revenue, the expected reality shock is now slowly setting in. The German dioceses are still quite optimistic. It is expected that revenue will be halved by 2060. That will probably happen much faster. The notorious baby boomers are retiring, which means that they no longer pay church tax. The next generation is not only considerably smaller in number, it also has no significant ties to the church. Even the grandparents of today's primary school children hardly have any ties to the church anymore, and their parents are almost always far removed from the church. There is no replacement. As the church withdraws from the area, the cultural link to the church that sometimes still exists is also decreasing. Many villages in predominantly rural regions only have one Sunday Mass because a retired priest lives in the area. As this generation of priests dies, the liturgical practice in the villages will also die out, and with it the last connection to the church will be lost for many. In the staffing plans of many dioceses, little or no distinction is made between priests and employees in pastoral service. However, a diocese can only afford employees if the income generates the salaries. Priests are not employees and are not entitled to a salary. The bishop takes them into his service and has the obligation to ensure their care. That's a difference." End quote. In other words, the vocations crisis in Germany has also come home to pay its consequences. You can thank the revolution of Vatican II and its new ecclesiology for this crisis. The data is very clear that vocations began to fall off a cliff in the church right after the imposition of the new Mass. The data is unequivocal about that. Fewer vocations are caused also by families leaving the church, which causes the church tax to decrease, which causes the dioceses and episcopal conferences to go bankrupt, which then causes the church to be able to spend less money on all these problems, which becomes a self-feeding cycle that never ends. It's all connected together, unfortunately. And it's going to continue as long as the way of doing things in the church in the present continues without change. What is needed is a return to tradition, so to speak. Whether that's the traditional liturgy, I tend to think it is, but a lot of people would disagree with that. But what it really requires at the most basic level is for the priest to start preaching Catholicism again, to teaching the faith. You can teach the hard truths of the faith and do it in a pastoral, charitable, peaceful way. But the church in Germany right now is the spear point of the revolution of the church. They are the vanguard of the new synodal religion. They push harder and faster than even Rome does on this. And that is absolutely feeding into this financial crisis they're going through. But it's going to get worse. Quote, "We can now wait for the first dioceses to start putting the brakes on hiring new parish and pastoral workers. This will not be too difficult as the number of applicants for these jobs has been falling for some time. Even though the process has been apparent for some time and will continue for a long time, we can say that the first nominal fall in church tax represents a turning point that has a signaling effect. Adjusted for inflation, church tax has been falling for some time, but that is nothing compared to the number actually falling. In addition to the decline in church taxpayers, and the overall economic development must also be taken into account. In recent decades, we have had a steadily prosperous economy. This suffered a slight dip due to the controversial 2020 measures and showed a certain recovery afterwards. However, there is no way around revising the forecast significantly downwards again. The current federal government of Germany will contribute to a massive reduction in church tax with its economic policy. Our country's economy and thus also the income situation of citizens will undergo a shrinkage process in the coming years, never seen in the history of our country. A drastically deteriorating income situation of citizens will cause income tax to fall, which will also reduce church tax, which as an ancillary tax will then be also fall. At the same time, with taxes continuing to rise because the state shows no inclination towards spending discipline, politicians will create ever new incentives to save on church tax. The number of people leaving the church for economic reasons will continue to rise. If the trend remains the same, the number of those who no longer want to help finance the officially administered decline in faith in church institutions will also increase. The synodal path and its consequences will also be reflected in church tax revenue. Quite a few believers will no longer be deterred by the de facto excommunication that comes with refusing to pay church tax. They will come to terms with pastors locally or in a spiritual community or movement. I support a good project with my donation, and we act as if it were church tax. In any case, it cannot be completely ruled out that the state collection of church tax will no longer be profitable for the state below a certain revenue, since the collection is remunerated as a percentage of the revenue. Here, too, the decline is starting a new dynamic that could make the process far more progressive than church authorities currently imagine. While all church figures are usually made public in a press release, this time the figure for church tax revenue was posted very quietly and without attracting attention on the website of the Secretariat of the German Bishops' Conference. The reason lies precisely in the psychological effect that this turning point represents. The church authorities and state financial administrators have long been able to extrapolate what year 2024 will look like. It will be interesting to see what dynamics the decline will take. In any case, the quiet approach from Bonn is good for loud speculation." End quote. So a lot of this is going to result in the few priests who are left being defenders of the faith, regardless of how they express it. This is something that he goes on in the rest of this article, which if you want to read for yourself, you can. He goes on to describe a scenario where in Germany you'll have SSPX priests standing shoulder to shoulder, metaphorically speaking, even with charismatics and others who teach the gospel and provide the sacraments. And I do kind of hope that that's a bit of an exaggeration, but the data does show that the only places the faith is growing are in those places, among hardline traditionalist communities and in charismatic Catholic communities, and in the weird overlap that does exist between the two. So some kind of reconciliation between the two, otherwise generally hostile camps, will have to come in the future, since the only place we'll get the sacraments in the next few decades are going to be those places. Traditionally minded communities in some form or another. And you can argue in the comments if you want to about charismatic Catholicism versus traditional Catholicism. I'm personally not interested in that debate. I find it tedious. But that's what's going to be the case for Germany unless something changes. And again, you want to turn this around, the church needs to do a few things. One, stop trying to be friends with the secular world. We don't need the friendship of the secular world. To quote a fictional pope, I don't know what to do with the friendship of the secular world. Don't know what to do with it. But the other thing that needs to happen is, as an extension of that, is that after doing that, or at the same time as doing that, start teaching the faith again in the Orthodox traditional way. At the very least, restore reverence as a mandatory thing in the liturgy. Make the traditional Mass more widespread, and then make your liturgical focuses in the Latin West based on where the people go over time. Guarantee it'll be to the traditional Mass, if it's widespread available. Take a zero-tolerance policy, if need be, change the Code of Canon Law, as I went over in a video on Saturday, regarding what happens with Ted McCarrick types. Take care of those problems, and then you have the church stand up against the world's evils, and you'll see people coming back to the Mass. Fortunately, that's not going to happen anytime soon. But, as I've reported as a sign of hope, while the seminaries may be shrinking, across the West you're seeing a God-given phenomenon that does point to a restoration, and that the priests and the seminarians in the seminarians now, across the board, far more conservative than any of their post-conciliar predecessors. They are predominantly traditionally minded at the very least. And they have to hold their cards close to the chest to make it through those seminaries. So pray for them, because that is a sign of hope. And with traditionally minded priests, preach the gospel, the real gospel, you may see this restoration that we desperately need. I'm curious, what do you think? Do you think the possibility of the church tax in Germany dropping so drastically that the second richest church in the country, or in the world rather, possibly basically having to reorganize itself for much leaner times in the future, do you think that that's going to be a good thing? What do you think the effect on the Vatican will be? Germany traditionally gives about the second largest giver of material wealth to the Vatican. What do you think the effect on the church will be more broadly with that? Let me know in the comments, please. Do you think this is coming to America? Let me know what you think. And hit like and subscribe if you haven't, because it does help. So does sharing this on social media. That helps too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.